Millionaire elderly woman is betrayed by her own son and loses the entire fortune she built throughout her life. But during the court hearing, she revealed something that shocked everyone. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. Everything I had built over 72 years of work and sacrifice disappeared in a matter of minutes. And the worst part, it was my own son who stole everything from me. The air was thick in the courtroom. Filled with journalists and lawyers, the room seemed to be waiting for the verdict of what appeared to be an ordinary hearing. But nothing was ordinary about this case. At the far end on the stand sat a 72-year-old woman with a face marked by the passage of time, standing firm. Her name was Clara Rodriguez, a woman who had managed to build an empire from scratch, facing countless obstacles, always with impeccable ethics and blind trust in the people she loved. But today, the way everyone looked at her was different. She was being accused of fraud, and the fortune she had worked her whole life to build had been taken from her in the cruelest way possible. Justice seemed to have turned against her. "This can't be happening," Clara thought as she felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. Society saw her as a criminal. The press kept churning out headlines calling her fraudulent and dishonest. But what no one knew, what no one could imagine, was that the real traitor in all of this was not her. With a firm voice and profound pain, Clara lifted her gaze to meet the eyes of those present, and without further ado, dropped the bomb that would change everything. The person who robbed me, who destroyed me, is my own son, Roberto. The murmur in the room was deafening. No one had expected it. Roberto, her son, the man she had trusted above all, the one who had been her greatest pride, was now being accused of everything that had happened to her. He, a successful millionaire, had used her trust to manipulate documents, forge signatures, and empty her bank account. Years of hard work and effort vanished as if they were dust. In that moment, Clara felt nothing but a profound emptiness. Her heart, shattered by betrayal, could only think of one thing: how could her own son do this to her? But amid her pain and despair, there was still something keeping her standing. Her family, not her blood family, but the family she had created years ago with 3 orphaned children she had taken in, Anna, Lucas, and Tiago. These children, who over the years had become like her own, were now by her side, watching the situation with eyes full of uncertainty, but also unconditional love. As the world crumbled around her, Clara, with a broken heart but stronger than ever, realized that she was not alone. She had those 3 innocent souls who believed in her, who trusted her. "I'm not giving up," she thought, looking at the 3 children with a smile that, though weak, reflected the determination still burning inside her. "I'm going to fight for you, and I'm going to fight for my name." The courtroom was still in chaos, the murmurs of disbelief blending with the sound of cameras, but Clara no longer heard them. In her mind, there was only one thing: finding a way to prove that Roberto was the real culprit and reclaim what had been stolen from her. The sun was setting when Clara arrived at her house, a multi-story building that had been her refuge for so many years. But today, as she stepped through the door, it no longer felt like a home. The air was thick, as if the house itself was mourning all that she had lost. The house she had built, every corner filled with memories, sacrifices, and achievements, now felt empty. There were no celebrations upon her arrival, no applause or cameras like there had been in the days of glory. Quite the opposite. The silence was overwhelming. The weight of her son's betrayal hit her with every step she took through the house. How had it come to this? But despite the pain, there was something that gave her the strength to keep going. Anna, Lucas, and Tiago. The 3 orphan children she had taken in years ago. The same ones who, by a twist of fate, had now become her true family. Though young, their love was greater than any material possession. They didn't see her as the woman who had lost everything. They saw her as the heroine she had always been to them. And that was enough for Clara. "How do you feel, Grandma?" Tiago, the youngest of the three, asked as he came up to her for a hug. Clara felt the weight of the question, but also the warmth of his affection. Despite what had happened, these children gave her hope. "I'm fine, my love," Clara replied, forcing a smile, "and I'll be better, I promise." Lucas, who was 15 and had always been the most serious, looked at her with a mix of concern and respect. It was as if, at his young age, he already understood the weight of what was happening, but didn't know how to help. Anna, the oldest, who despite her 17 years seemed much more mature, came closer and took Clara's hand. "What are we going to do now, Grandma?" Anna asked. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of sadness and determination. "We know you didn't do it, but the world is looking at you like you're guilty. We can't let this destroy you." Clara sighed deeply. She knew that the battle ahead would not be easy. The judicial system was against her, and Roberto's name was on every front page. Rumors swirled around her, and worst of all was the misunderstanding from those she had trusted her life with. No one could understand what she was feeling. "I know, Anna, but I don't care what the world thinks of me anymore. What matters now is that I'm going to fight to prove the truth, and I'll do it for you, for us." That night, Clara sat down with the three children and explained what was happening. She didn't want to hide the truth from them, but she also didn't want them to feel guilty or scared. She told them about Roberto, how he had always been her pride and hope until he decided to betray her in the cruelest way. She told them about her love for them and how, even though she had lost everything, there was still something no one could take from her: her family. "We have to be strong, because I know this won't be easy, but we'll do it together, right?" "Yes, Grandma," they replied in unison. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She stayed up thinking about the days ahead, about the long road she would have to travel to clear her name. But something had changed in her. The sadness no longer consumed her. She was filled with determination. She was no longer going to be the victim of the story. Now, she was the protagonist. And even though everything seemed to be against her, she wouldn't give up. At the first light of day, Clara was already up, filled with a determination she hadn't felt in years. She knew the battle would be long, difficult, and most importantly, that society had already passed its judgment. But she wasn't going to let the shadow of lies crush her. She approached her desk, where her mobile phone lay, and began searching for information on lawyers who could help her. She didn't just want any lawyer. She needed someone who believed in her, someone who wasn't driven by money or fame. "This isn't just about money. It's about my life," she thought, as her finger scrolled across the screen. Finally, she found what she was looking for: a lawyer who had won cases against powerful corporations and influential people. His name was Victor Gomez, a man known for his impeccable ethics and fierce commitment to justice. Dialing the number was easy, but the moment the phone started ringing, Clara felt a knot in her stomach. She feared that someone so important wouldn't want to help her. After what felt like an eternity, someone answered with a calm and professional voice. "Mr. Gomez? My name is Clara Rodriguez, and I need your help." "Ms. Rodriguez, of course. I've heard about your case in the media. Don't worry, I'll help you." Clara felt a small spark of hope upon hearing Victor's voice. She didn't know if he would be the answer to all her problems, but at least, for the first time in a long while, she felt like someone was willing to listen to her without judgment. "I'll be at your office at 10 a.m., Clara responded firmly. That same morning, Clara left her house with Anna, Lucas, and Tiago by her side. She knew what she was about to do would be the first step in a long and hard-fought battle, but she also knew that she couldn't keep being seen as the victim. It wasn't just her future at stake. Now she had to think about theirs too. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Roberto was in his mansion, immersed in a sea of luxury and excess, but with a growing emptiness inside him. He had achieved everything he wanted: money, power, recognition, but he had lost something far more valuable: peace. The weight of guilt began to eat away at him, though he was still unwilling to admit it. His wife, Carolina, watched him from the doorway of his office, her gaze cold and distant. They had become so estranged over the past few months that they no longer even shared the same rooms at night. The rumors of Clara's betrayal had begun to affect their family, and although Roberto tried to maintain a facade of success, he could no longer deny what he had done. "Have you spoken to your mother?" Carolina asked, her voice heavy with reproach. Roberto turned his gaze away, a mix of discomfort and fear in his expression. His wife knew there was more to this story, something he didn't want to face. "I have nothing to say to her," he replied, his tone sharp. Carolina sighed and turned away, leaving him alone in his office. Roberto stared at his mobile phone, unsure whether to call his mother. He had made a monumental mistake, but his pride kept him from taking the first step toward reconciliation. At 10 a.m., Clara arrived at Victor Gomez's office. She sat down in front of him, her back straight and eyes filled with determination. She knew she couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. The conversation was direct and to the point. Victor listened carefully to Clara's story, and although he didn't promise her anything, he assured her he would fight with all his might to prove her innocence. "I won't promise you an easy path," Victor said at the end of the meeting, "but I promise I'll try. The first thing we'll do is investigate the documents Roberto falsified and look for solid evidence. This is just the first step." Clara nodded, grateful. It wasn't going to be an easy victory, but with Victor by her side, she felt that she at least had a chance. The road to Victor Gomez's office felt endless to Clara. Each step echoed loudly, as though the weight of her struggle might crush her at any moment. But something inside her refused to give up. She knew that the truth was her only ally, and no matter how hard it was, the truth could never be destroyed by lies or falsifications. In the weeks that followed, Clara threw herself completely into the investigation with Victor. They spent hours poring over documents, searching for evidence, and trying to find witnesses who could prove that Roberto had forged everything. But the system wasn't on her side. Every attempt to seek justice felt like a direct blow to her. It was then that Clara began to realize that, in addition to fighting the betrayal of her own son, she was also facing a system that favored people like Roberto, rich, powerful, and well-connected. Many of the witnesses Victor had found were either intimidated or bought off to change their version of the events. The authorities simply didn't want to invest time or resources in a 72-year-old woman without fortune and without society's support. One cold November afternoon, Clara sat in Victor's office, staring at the enormous pile of papers on the desk. Each one represented a battle, an obstacle, an effort that seemed to lead nowhere. She could feel the weight of defeat closer than ever. "Have we lost?" Clara asked, looking at the lawyer with a mixture of hopelessness and exhaustion in her eyes. Victor lifted his gaze from the papers. He knew Clara was on the edge of collapse, and truth be told, he felt the pressure too. They had given everything they could, but their options were running out. "We haven't lost, Clara." His voice was firm, but there was genuine concern in his eyes. "But we need something more, something we can use to our advantage. We can't keep fighting just with documentary evidence. We need something more substantial." Clara nodded slowly. Although she felt defeated, something inside her kept pushing her forward. She thought of the children, Anna, Lucas, and Tiago, who reminded her every day of what truly mattered. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Roberto was living in his own world of luxury and emptiness. Although he seemed to have it all, he felt a deep void that money and power couldn't fill. His family, his wife Carolina, and their children had grown increasingly distant from him. Despite his efforts to maintain a facade of success, he knew his decisions had started to break him from the inside out. On one of his lonely nights, while watching TV in his mansion, Roberto received a call. It was from his mother. "Hello, Mom." His voice sounded cold, as though he was trying to avoid any confrontation. "Roberto." Clara's voice was full of pain, but also calmness that surprised her son. "I want to talk to you. What happened? What you did? You can't take it from me. But I'm offering you a chance. I want you to be the one to give me the answers. I don't want you to keep hiding behind your lies. I'm giving you one last chance to make it right." Roberto fell silent on the other end of the line. His mother's words made him waver, but his pride was still stronger than his guilt. He wasn't ready to face what he had done. Instead of accepting the offer, he decided to hang up. "I have nothing more to say." And with that, he ended the call. Clara stared at the phone in silence. She knew her son wasn't ready to admit his mistakes, but for some reason, that call had opened a door within her. She wasn't going to give up, not just for him, but for the children, for herself. That same night, Clara returned home, where her 3 little ones were waiting for her. Despite the growing difficulty of the situation, the unconditional love of those children kept her strong. Ina, Lucas, and Tiago approached her, and Clara embraced them, as if the simple gesture could ease the immense burden she carried on her shoulders. "We're not going to give up, right, Grandma?" Tiago asked, looking at Clara with a smile that, though small, reflected all the trust he had in her. "Never," Clara replied, holding the 3 of them tight against her chest. "Never." The sun was beginning to set over the city, painting the streets that Clara walked every day in a warm orange hue. Despite the increasing complications, something in her heart told her she couldn't give up. She was not alone. And that was what surprised her the most. She never imagined that, in her darkest moments, allies would emerge to help her recover what she had lost. It was a rainy afternoon when Victor called her. His voice was more excited than ever. "Clara, I think we have a chance." His tone was urgent but filled with hope. "A former university colleague of mine, an investigative journalist, has offered to help us. He has connections within the government and the courts that we could use. If we joined forces, we could put pressure on Roberto to expose him." Clara listened in silence, unsure what to think. She had spent so much time feeling like everything was against her that the idea of finding someone willing to help her seemed almost unreal. Do you really think someone will help us?" she asked, a bit distrustful. Victor took a deep breath. He knew Clara had been hit by too many disappointments, but he wasn't going to let her hope fade so easily. "I don't know if it will be enough, but we have to try. The resources we have are limited, but if this journalist gives us access to more information, it could be the breakthrough we need." Clara thought about it while watching the rain hit her window. Could she really trust a stranger? Was this her last chance, or just another lie? But then she thought of the children, the family she had built, and realized she couldn't keep waiting for things to resolve on their own. The next day, Clara, accompanied by Victor, met with the journalist at a discreet café in the city center. The man, middle-aged with a well-groomed beard and sunglasses, seemed a bit nervous, but his gaze was full of determination. "I'm Javier Hernandez," he said, extending his hand to greet Clara. "I've been following the case closely. The documents Roberto falsified are more extensive than we thought. I'm willing to help, but we need to move quickly. If we don't act soon, he could erase all the evidence." Clara stared at him. She had nothing to lose, but at the same time, she felt like she was handing herself over to something very big, something she didn't fully understand. "How can we trust you?" Clara asked, her tone showing both distrust and an openness to the possibility of change. Javier smiled sincerely. I've also been a victim of corruption. At one point in my career, I was forced to report things I didn't want to, but I understood that if I didn't do it, I could never look my children in the eyes again. I know what it's like to lose everything, and I know what it's like to lose your dignity. I'm here because I want Roberto to pay for what he did, to his mother and to everyone else he's deceived. Victor, who had been silent, nodded. This is a big risk, Clara, but it may be the only chance we have. Clara looked at both men, Victor and Javier. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope shining in the darkness. Then let's do it, no matter the cost. I can't let Roberto get away with this. With renewed determination, Clara began preparing her next move. Javier used his contacts in the media to leak some documents, while Victor worked on gathering more legal evidence. The strategy was starting to take shape, but they also knew that danger was near. Roberto was shrewd, and he would never let a mere journalist and lawyer corner him. Meanwhile, in Roberto's mansion, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The lies he had built over the years were beginning to crumble around him. Carolina, his wife, looked at him with a mixture of disdain and sadness. The relationship that was once strong was now on the verge of collapse. Are you really going to let all this end like this? Carolina asked, her eyes filled with tears. How could you do this to your mother, to your children, to yourself? Roberto didn't answer. Inside, he felt like he was drowning, but his pride kept him silent. He knew his mother was fighting, but he still didn't understand the magnitude of the battle she was facing. Clara, for her part, was determined to continue. What had started as a fight for her dignity was now becoming a war for justice. And for the first time in a long time, Clara didn't feel like she was fighting alone. Clara never imagined that the path to justice would be so tortuous. With every step she took, new obstacles seemed to rise in front of her. After weeks of working with Victor and Javier, they had managed to gather solid evidence, showing that Roberto had falsified several documents and diverted large sums of money from Clara's account. The investigation, though promising, was still far from complete, and time, as always, was working against them. One day, while Clara was reviewing some papers at her house, Victor called her, his voice filled with concern. Clara, we have a problem. His tone was less optimistic than in their previous conversations. It seems that someone is trying to sabotage our investigation. The documents we got have been leaked, and the witnesses we had are disappearing one by one. Something's wrong, and you can't imagine what we're up against. Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. She wasn't just fighting against the betrayal of her own son. She was also battling a system full of corruption. The shadows looming over her weren't just figurative. Someone was trying to make sure she never reached the truth. And what can we do now? Clara asked, trying to stay calm, but fear was beginning to take hold of her. Victor sighed on the other end of the line. What we need to do now is act quickly. We can't stay still, Clara. This is the moment when you need to be braver than ever. If we don't move with caution, we'll lose everything. Clara knew he was right. The situation was getting more dangerous, but she couldn't afford to give up. Not after everything she'd been through, not after seeing the determination in the eyes of the children who stood by her. In the following days, the pressure mounted. Clara began receiving anonymous calls threatening to destroy everything she had rebuilt if she didn't give up the fight. The voice on the other end was cold, calculating, and made it clear that Clara's enemies weren't going to stop until they saw her completely defeated. Stop now, old woman. You have no idea what you're up against. Stop looking for the truth. The male voice told her one night, making Clara shiver. Clara gritted her teeth, but didn't give in. She knew the threats weren't idle, and that she had become a target. But something inside her ignited with greater fury. This fight wasn't just for her. It was for the truth, for justice, for everything she had worked for in her life. Determined to move forward, Clara began meeting more frequently with Victor and Javier. The three of them began to craft even more secretive plans, hoping that Roberto and his accomplices wouldn't be able to discover their movements before it was too late. The documents they held in their hands were their only advantage, and they had to use them wisely. Meanwhile, Roberto began to notice his mother's movements, though he still believed he could control the situation. He was so sure of his power and his connections that he didn't understand how close he was to losing everything. One afternoon, while Clara and Victor met in a discreet warehouse to review the leaked documents, something strange happened. When Clara entered the warehouse, something didn't feel right. A few seconds later, Victor, who had been reviewing the papers on his laptop, abruptly stood up, his face pale. "Clara, we're being watched," he whispered, looking around with suspicion. "We need to leave now." Clara barely had time to react. A metallic sound came from the door of the warehouse, and before they could leave, two hooded men burst into the room. The situation was becoming far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Victor tried to stand to defend Clara, but one of the men violently shoved him back. Clara, with her heart racing, tried to think quickly. In that moment, an alarmed shout echoed down the hallway. The hooded men turned, and before they could react, a third man entered to the rescue, Javier. Swiftly, he pulled out his phone and pressed a button. The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, but Clara knew that didn't mean they were out of danger. Still, it was enough to make the men stop. "Let's go now!" Javier shouted, running toward Clara. The chaos that followed was fast, but at that moment Clara realized that despite the threats and attacks, something greater was guiding her: justice. The hooded men disappeared into the shadows before they could cause any more harm. But Clara, though terrified, knew something inside her had changed. She was no longer just a woman fighting for her life. She was a woman ready to face hell, to expose the truth. The day Clara thought she had hit rock bottom, she still didn't know that the real challenge was yet to come. The feeling of being hunted, watched, never left her for a moment. Every step she took seemed to bring her closer to an abyss from which she could never escape. She had lost so many small battles, her financial resources, the trust of the people, even the hopes she had when this all began. Now, the only thing left was her determination to fight for what was hers. The sun shone faintly through the clouds that morning, but Clara didn't feel the warmth. She was in Victor's office, reviewing the final details of their strategy. However, the atmosphere was tenser than ever. "Clara, we've lost the media's support," Victor said in a grim voice. "Some journalists have been bought. No one wants to talk about the case. And the police, though they want to help, are under Roberto's pressure. If we don't find something more concrete, we won't get the court to listen." Clara felt faint. She had come so far, fighting tooth and nail for the truth, and now she felt hope slipping through her fingers. The news that the media had silenced her case devastated her, but she knew she couldn't give up, not now. "What if we go directly to the court?" she asked, searching for an escape. "What if we take it to trial without relying on the media, make the court see it live?" Victor looked at her uncertainly. "Do you have anything else? Any proof we haven't used yet? If we don't have something solid, Roberto could try to dismantle everything." Just when Clara thought there was no hope left, her phone rang. The screen showed Javier's name. "Clara, what you feared has happened," Javier said in a worried tone. "One of the witnesses has disappeared, and not only that, I have information that there's a leak within our team. Someone is betraying us." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Betrayal was something she couldn't tolerate, and now someone within her closest circle was selling her out. For a moment, she thought it was all lost, but the image of the orphaned children appeared in her mind. They believed in her. She couldn't fail them. "Who is it? Who's betraying us?" she asked firmly, though fear lingered in her voice. Javier was silent for a moment, as if evaluating what he could say. "It's Victor." Clara was speechless. The name took her breath away. It was a blow she hadn't expected. Victor, her lawyer, the person she trusted most, had betrayed everything she had fought to build. Was it for money? For fear? Why? "No, it can't be," Clara murmured, unable to understand what she was hearing. Javier interrupted her. "I've been investigating. There's proof, Clara. Everything points to him working for Roberto. He's the one leaking information, playing the enemy's game." A heavy weight fell on Clara. It felt as though the entire world had betrayed her, that she couldn't trust anyone anymore. Throughout her life, she had worked to build a legacy based on principles, trust, and honesty. Now, all of that seemed to be crumbling, but she couldn't give up. She couldn't let her life be destroyed by lies and betrayals. Clara decided to face the reality with the same courage she had shown in overcoming every obstacle in her path. "We're taking Victor out of the game, Javier." "Don't," she said with a calmness that surprised them both. "But we're not giving up. We're going after Roberto and the entire corrupt system supporting him. What we need to do is get the final evidence that will take him down, and we'll do it no matter the cost." Javier nodded, impressed by Clara's strength. Despite everything that had happened, she wasn't going to let herself be defeated. Clara's plan was risky. She decided to contact one of Roberto's former employees, a man who had worked for him for years, but was dismissed when he began questioning the ethics of his boss's decisions. This man, Enrique, was willing to risk everything to reveal the truth. Enrique provided Clara and Javier with crucial evidence about Roberto's financial manipulations. Documents that not only confirmed the embezzlement, but also showed irregular payments to government officials to ensure their silence. With this evidence, Clara and Javier prepared for what would be the final trial. They knew that despite everything, the battle was still not won. They still had powerful enemies, but Enrique's sacrifice, the courage of the children waiting for her at home, and Clara's determination made everything worthwhile. It was the final step, and Clara was ready to take it, no matter the price. The day of the trial finally arrived, but Clara didn't feel the weight of anxiety you might expect from someone facing the greatest battle of their life. The fear, the desperation, all that she had felt before, had turned into pure, concentrated determination. Now, there was only one thing left: to win. Not just for herself, but for the children who looked at her with hope, for those who believed in the truth. The courtroom was full. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if everyone was waiting for the first move, the first strike. Clara sat, her hands clasped together in her lap, staring ahead. In front of her, Roberto, in his immaculate suit, seemed calmer than ever. There was an arrogance in his posture, an air of superiority that made it clear he believed everything would go in his favor. But Clara wasn't intimidated. In her heart, she knew this was her last chance to achieve justice, not only to reclaim what was lost, but to prove to the world who she truly was, the woman who, despite everything, never gave up. The trial began with charges of fraud and document forgery that Roberto had orchestrated over the years. Victor, the lawyer who had betrayed Clara, was defending Roberto. Despite the obvious corruption surrounding the case, he presented well-prepared arguments, appealing to the idea that Clara was simply confused and that everything was just a misunderstanding. However, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. The documents Enrique had given to Clara and Javier were presented to the court. The evidence showed the manipulation of funds, illegal transfers, and clear proof that Roberto had used his trusted position to steal from his mother. But the most important piece was still missing: the confession. Clara looked at her son one last time. Though his face was impassive, her heart beat fiercely. She knew what it had cost to get here. She had given everything she had to fight for the truth, and now she was facing the opportunity to confront her own blood, to make him pay for his crimes. Then the decisive moment came. During the final testimony, Clara stood up from her seat. All eyes turned toward her. With a firm voice, though heavy with contained emotions, she began to speak. "I am Roberto's mother," Clara began, looking directly at her son. "And I've lived my entire life building something I thought could never be destroyed. But my son showed me that there is nothing more painful than being betrayed by the one you love most. He stole everything from me: my trust, my money, my peace." Clara's words echoed throughout the courtroom. A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone present absorbed the magnitude of what she had just said. Roberto, who had been sitting with his head lowered, lifted it now, his eyes filled with rage. He knew what was at stake, and he wasn't going to let Clara win. "It's a lie!" Roberto shouted, suddenly jumping up from his chair. "My mother is crazy. None of this is true. This is all revenge because I'm not by her side, because I didn't submit to her will." But Clara didn't let herself be swayed. She knew Roberto was using his usual manipulation tactics to cast doubt on her version of events. She stood firm, unwavering. "No, Roberto," Clara said, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm not the one lying. The one who's been lying all along is you, and I'm going to prove it." Clara pulled an envelope from her bag and opened it with steady hands. Inside was a recording. It was a recording of a conversation between Roberto and one of his accomplices, where they discussed plans to forge documents and divert large sums of money. The evidence that had been hidden for so long finally came to light. The courtroom was in shock. Roberto's words, recorded in that conversation, left no room for doubt about his guilt. There was no longer any question. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming. Roberto, seeing there was no escape, collapsed back into his chair. His face, once filled with confidence and arrogance, was now marked by desperation. He couldn't believe that his world was crumbling before his eyes. The final move had failed. The truth had won. Clara couldn't stop watching the scene. She had fought so hard to get here, but she didn't feel joy. She only felt a deep exhaustion, as if everything she had gone through had drained all her strength. Yet when she looked at the children waiting for her outside the courtroom, their eyes shining with hope, Clara knew it had been worth it. Justice, at last, had triumphed. Roberto was arrested that day, and Clara, though she knew there was still much to rebuild, could feel for the first time in a long while that all the suffering she had endured had served a purpose. The battle hadn't just been about money or her reputation. It had been about the most important principle of all, the truth. Clara had achieved the unimaginable, not only recovering what was lost, but proving that when you have the will to fight, neither betrayal nor power can extinguish the strength of a determined heart. The trial was over. Clara's victory was undeniable, but the sense of having won didn't bring her the peace she had anticipated. She had regained her name, her property, and the justice that had been taken from her, but inside there was something missing. The battle she had fought for so many months, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the constant fear of losing, it all seemed to dissipate into the air, leaving behind only the reality that nothing would ever be the same again. Roberto was behind bars, And despite the gratification of seeing him pay for his crimes, Clara didn't feel a complete victory. For so many years, she had worked hard to build a family, to forge a solid future. She had succeeded, but in the process, she had ignored many warning signs of what truly mattered. Trust, truth, love. Those were the pillars that really held everything together. That night, Clara sat alone in her living room, staring at the extinguished fireplace. There were moments when she wished she could turn back time, back to when it all began, back to when Roberto had still been by her side. But she couldn't change the past. She could only move forward. The children entered the room one by one with shy smiles. Despite everything that had happened, they still saw her as their heroine. It didn't matter what the world thought of her. To them, Clara was the woman who had rescued them, who had given them a home when no one else would. Their love was all Clara needed now. "Grandma, how do you feel?" asked Sophia, the eldest of the children, as she sat beside her. Clara looked at her, taking her hand gently. "I feel different, Sophia. It's hard to explain. I fought so much for justice, for the truth, for us, and now that all of that is behind us, I don't know exactly what to do with everything we've won." Sophia, with her innocence, smiled at her. "I think that after everything, what we need most is to be together, all of us. It doesn't matter what happens, as long as we're with the ones we love." Those words, simple yet full of wisdom, touched Clara's heart. In that moment, she understood something she had overlooked for so long. What was most valuable wasn't the money, nor even the victory in court. What mattered most was the love she shared with these children, her family. The next day, Clara went to the place where it had all started, her old home, the mansion she had worked so hard to build. She looked at the walls, now empty, the rooms that had once been filled with life. The mansion was no longer a symbol of success, but a reminder of the scars her past had left. But it didn't matter. Clara knew that, although her material life had crumbled, her emotional life had grown in ways she had never imagined. She had learned to prioritize what truly mattered. Along the way, she lost her fortune, her trust in people, and nearly her son. But she had found a new family in the children, a family that accepted and loved her without conditions. She had discovered that true wealth didn't lie in what she owned, but in the relationships she had cultivated, in the truth she had defended, and in the strength she had shown. When Clara returned home, she was met with one last obstacle. An envelope was on her kitchen table, with no return address. She opened the envelope with trembling hands, and inside she found a handwritten letter from Roberto, her own son. The letter began with a few words that left her frozen. "Mom, I know I can't ask for forgiveness for what I've done. I've lost everything. But I want you to know that even if you hate me, I'm trying to change. I'm starting to understand everything I made you suffer, and it hurts to not have seen it before. If you ever decide to speak to me, I'll be here." Roberto's words hit Clara hard. The letter was not just an attempt at reconciliation, but a recognition of what Clara had done for him. Perhaps, Clara thought, the true victory wasn't in defeating him, but in giving him a chance to find his own path to redemption. Despite everything she had lost, Clara knew that what Roberto needed most was the opportunity to change, to start over. Clara thought for a long time. Finally, she tucked the letter into her purse, unsure if she would ever read it. What she did know was that she had reached the end of this chapter of her life, a chapter full of pain, sacrifice, betrayal, and finally, forgiveness. The true victory wasn't the trial won, nor the fortune regained. The true victory was the inner peace Clara had found, understanding that love, family, and truth were the only things that really mattered. The sun rose over the horizon, bathing the trees in Clara's garden with its golden light. It was a garden she had tended to with such care during the years she had lived in her mansion. The house, though now a bit simpler, still felt like home, the place where she had learned to be strong, but also the place where she had learned to forgive. That morning, Clara sat on her porch, watching the horizon. The cool breeze caressed her face, as if the wind itself was embracing her, whispering that everything had passed. The battle for her name had been tough, but in this calm moment, Clara felt that at last she had found the peace she had sought for so long. The children were inside the house, helping to organize a few things. Sophia, with her strong-willed character, was giving orders to the others, while Javier and Emilio argued over who would clean the garden. Clara couldn't help but smile as she watched them. Though her life had been shattered by betrayal and loss, what she had gained in the end was far greater. Suddenly, the sound of a car parking in the driveway made her stand up. It wasn't a car she recognized, but deep down, she knew who it was. Roberto. Much time had passed since his conviction, but Clara had never stopped thinking about her son. She had forgiven him in her heart, though she wasn't sure if he had truly changed. Clara walked slowly toward the entrance, her steps steady, as though she knew exactly what she needed to do. When she saw Roberto get out of the car, his face was different. No longer did it hold the arrogance, the cold expression that used to dominate. There was something in his eyes now, a mixture of regret and a small spark of hope. He was a different man, one who, though marked by his mistakes, was now trying to understand the weight of his actions. "Mom," Roberto said in a low voice, his head bowed, as though he couldn't bring himself to look her directly in the eye. "I know there's no way to undo what I've done, but I want you to know that I'm trying to change. I've started going to therapy. I'm taking responsibility for everything I did, for how I hurt you. I want you to forgive me. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I want to try." Clara watched him in silence for a moment. There was no anger in her heart, only a deep pain for what had happened, but also an understanding that, just as she had done, Roberto needed to find his own path to redemption. "Son," Clara began, her voice soft but firm. "Forgiveness is not something that comes easily to me. I've been through so much because of you, and it still hurts. But I made mistakes too, by not seeing what was happening, by trusting you more than I should have. However, that doesn't mean there's no room for forgiveness. True forgiveness doesn't depend solely on what you do or what I do. It depends on what you are capable of doing with what you've learned." Roberto lifted his head and looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. He was a man who, after all this time, was starting to understand what really mattered. "I'm ready to learn, Mom. I'm ready to be a better man." Clara looked at him for a few more seconds. Then, with a deep sigh, she took a step toward him, opening her arms. Roberto hesitated for a moment, but then he embraced her tightly, as if, at last, he was coming home. It wasn't just the return of a son to his mother. It was the return of a man to his own humanity. The embrace lasted longer than either of them had imagined. It was as if time had stopped, as if everything that had happened before no longer mattered. The only thing that remained was the present, a moment of forgiveness and transformation. When they separated, Clara gave him a smile filled with understanding. "Come on, son. Life goes on and we have a lot to rebuild. But together, we'll do it." Roberto nodded, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled with sincerity. Together, they walked toward the house, where the children were waiting for them. In that moment, Clara understood that the true wealth of life was not in material possessions, but in relationships, the ability to love, forgive, and move forward. That night, the family gathered around the table, celebrating not just the end of a battle, but the beginning of a new chapter. Clara looked at all the children, at Roberto, and at the life she had rebuilt. She knew that many challenges still lay ahead, but what she had learned was the most valuable thing of all. In every fall, in every loss, there was a lesson, and with each lesson, the possibility to be reborn. And so, surrounded by those who truly mattered, Clara found the peace she had searched for all this time, because, in the end, the greatest triumph of all was not having won a trial, nor even having regained her fortune. It was having found the strength to forgive, to rebuild her life, and to give others what they needed most, her love. And so ends the incredible story of Clara, a woman who, despite betrayals and hardships, found the strength to reinvent herself and forgive. Were you surprised that Clara, after everything she went through, was able to give her son a second chance? Or perhaps you can relate to the struggle of maintaining trust and love in the face of adversity. If you enjoyed this journey full of emotion, struggle, and redemption, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more impactful stories like this one. What do you think about Clara's decision to forgive Roberto? Do you believe he will really change, or was it just a tactic to gain her forgiveness? Leave us your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. Remember, the most valuable thing in life is not wealth or material success, but the relationships we build and the power of forgiveness. Thank you for joining us in this story, and we'll see you in the next video. Don't miss it.